The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped between grocery store flyers and credit card offers. Heavy cardstock, ivory with gold embossing, my daughter Sophie's wedding invitation. I traced my finger over the elegant script, expecting to feel joy. But something cold settled in my chest instead, because 3 weeks earlier, Sophie had looked me straight in the eye over coffee and said the words that still echo in my mind. "Mom, I need you to step back from the wedding planning. Completely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs I was too proud to follow. But holding that invitation, seeing my name printed as just another guest, not as the mother of the bride who had dreamed of this day since Sophie took her first steps in my wedding shoes, something inside me finally snapped. Not with anger, with clarity. I walked to my desk, pulled out my phone, and dialed the number I'd memorized months ago. Rosewood Manor answered on the second ring. "Yes, this is Joan Roberts," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "I need to cancel the Catherine Roberts wedding reception, the one scheduled for next September." The venue coordinator paused, probably checking her system. "Mrs. Roberts, are you certain? The deposit is non-refundable at this point." "I'm certain," I replied. And for the first time in months, I truly was. 68 years. That's how long I've been on this earth, and for most of them, I thought I understood the weight of words. I was wrong. Some sentences land soft as snow, melting before you notice. Others hit like stones thrown at glass, leaving cracks that spread in patterns you never expect. Sophie's words that morning were the second kind. We were sitting at Willowbrook Cafe, the place where we'd shared hundreds of conversations over the years. Where I'd told her about her father's promotion when she was 12. Where she'd admitted she was failing calculus at 16. Where she'd introduced me to Marcus, her now fiancé, 4 years ago. The cafe smelled like cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee, sounds of the espresso machine providing familiar background music to our lives. But that morning, something was different. Sophie kept stirring her latte long after the foam had dissolved, her engagement ring catching the light with each circular motion. I'd bought her first coffee here when she turned 13, a milestone she'd begged for. Now she was 28, successful in her marketing career, living in a downtown loft. That cost more monthly than our first house's mortgage. "Mom," she started, still focused on that endless stirring. "We need to talk about the wedding." My heart lifted, finally. We'd been dancing around details for weeks, ever since Marcus proposed on New Year's Eve. I'd already started a binder, collected magazine clippings, bookmarked venues online. The mother-daughter planning I'd imagined since the day the ultrasound tech said, "It's a girl." "I've actually found some wonderful locations," I began, reaching for my purse where I kept the folder. "There's this restored barn upstate that does the most incredible—" "Mom!" Her voice cut through mine, sharp enough to stop my hand mid-reach. She finally looked up, and her expression made my stomach drop. It was the same look she'd worn at 15 when she told me she didn't want me chaperoning the school dance anymore. "Marcus and I have decided to handle the planning ourselves. All of it." I forced a smile, the kind you learn to perfect after decades of swallowing disappointment. "Of course, sweetheart. It's your day. But I'm happy to help with anything you need. Guest lists, flowers. I know the most wonderful florist who did arrangements for—" "No, Mom." She set down her spoon with a deliberate click against the saucer. "I need you to step back from the wedding planning, completely." The cafe sounds seemed to amplify. Someone laughed at a nearby table. The bell above the door chimed as a couple entered. Life continued moving while I sat frozen, processing words that felt like they'd been spoken in a foreign language. "I don't understand," I managed, though my throat felt lined with sandpaper. Sophie sighed. the kind that suggested she'd rehearsed this conversation. It's just, you can be a lot sometimes. Remember Emma's wedding? You practically took over. Her mother's planning, and cousin Rachel's. You sent her 15 emails about centerpiece options when she explicitly said she wanted simple. Each example hit like a small betrayal. Emma's mother had thanked me for my help. Rachel had seemed grateful for the suggestions. Hadn't they? Or had I been so eager to help, to be needed, that I'd missed the signs of intrusion? This is different, I said quietly. You're my daughter, which is exactly why I need boundaries. Sophie's voice softened slightly, but her resolve didn't waver. Marcus's family is very particular about events. His mother has connections. We want to handle things our way, without anyone feeling overshadowed or left out. Marcus's mother, Evelyn Chen Williams, the federal judge with the Harvard Law degree and the estate in Beacon Hill. We'd met exactly twice, both times at restaurants, where the waiters knew her by name and the wine cost more than my weekly groceries. So I'm being benched because his mother might feel overshadowed? The words tasted bitter. That's not what I'm saying. But Sophie's eyes darted away, confirming it was exactly what she was saying. Look, you'll be involved. You're the mother of the bride. You'll have your dress, your corsage, your place of honor. But the planning, the decisions, the details, Marcus and I need to do this ourselves. I wanted to remind her about the scrapbook under my bed, the one where I'd saved every school play program, every soccer team photo, every honor roll certificate, the one with a section labeled Sophie's future wedding, that I'd started when she was 7 and insisted on wearing her princess dress to grocery stores. I wanted to tell her about the dreams I'd saved alongside those memories, about mother-daughter, dress shopping trips and cake tastings and late-night talks about marriage like the ones my mother never lived to have with me. Instead, I nodded. If that's what you want? It is. She relaxed slightly, probably relieved I hadn't made a scene. Sophie always hated scenes. We're thinking next September, the 15th. Save the date. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. September 15th, my father's birthday. The man who'd walked me down the aisle because my mother had died when I was 19. Sophie knew this. We'd visited his grave every September 15th since she was old enough to understand death. Had she forgotten? Or did it simply not matter anymore? I should go, Sophie said, already gathering her things. Meeting with Marcus about the guest list. We're keeping it intimate. Maybe 100 people. 100 people was intimate. The wedding I'd imagined had family members she'd never met. Friends from my book club who'd watched her grow up. Neighbors who'd bandaged her skinned knees. But apparently, my imagination had no place in her reality. Of course, I said again, because what else was there to say? She kissed my cheek, a quick brush of lips that felt more like punctuation than affection. Thanks for understanding, Mom. I knew you would. But I didn't understand. Not then, sitting in that cafe as she walked away, her designer heels clicking against the tile floor. Not during the drive home, where I had to pull over twice because tears made the road blur. Not that night, lying in bed next to Harold, who snored through my quiet crying because after 40 years of marriage, he'd learned to sleep through many things. The truth settled in slowly over the following days, heavy as winter snow accumulating on a roof. I wasn't just being asked to step back from planning. I was being erased from a moment I'd carried in my heart since before Sophie was born. Harold tried to help in his Harold way. Maybe it's for the best, he said over breakfast, buttering his toast with mechanical precision. Weddings are expensive. Let them handle it. But Harold had never understood the language of women's dreams. He'd shown up to our own wedding like it was a dentist appointment, Necessary, scheduled, something to get through. He hadn't spent months imagining flower arrangements or debating invitation fonts. He certainly hadn't saved a folder labeled Sophie's Wedding on his computer, filled with links to venues and vendor reviews. 2 weeks passed in a strange limbo. Sophie texted occasionally, surface-level messages about work or asking if we wanted to have dinner. Always at restaurants now, never at home where we might accidentally discuss the wedding over pot roast. And memories. I responded with matching neutrality, playing the role of the understanding mother who definitely wasn't checking wedding forums at 2 a.m. or driving past potential venues just to imagine. Then came the morning I broke. It started with a phone call from my sister Patricia in Oregon. "Joan, I just got the save the date, September 15th. How exciting. You must be over the moon. Tell me everything. What's the venue? Have you picked a dress? Is she doing the something borrowed tradition? Remember Mom's pearl necklace?" I stood in my kitchen, gripping the phone, watching cardinal birds at the feeder Harold had installed last spring. Such simple creatures, cardinals. The fete. Male brings the female food during courtship, and she decides if he's worthy. No one tells the female cardinal she's being too involved in the nest-building process. "Joan, are you there?" "I'm here." My voice sounded hollow even to me. "I don't know the venue. Sophie and Marcus are handling everything themselves." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd lost connection. Then Patricia exhaled, long and slow. "Oh, honey. What happened? I could have lied. Could have spun some story about modern couples and independence. Instead, the truth spilled out like water from a broken dam. Every word Sophie had said, every feeling I'd swallowed, every night I'd spent staring at the ceiling wondering where I'd gone wrong. That ungrateful little... Patricia caught herself. "I'm sorry. I know she's my niece and I love her, but Joan, this is cruel. After everything you've done for her?" Everything I'd done. The phrase echoed as we talked, as Patricia raged on my behalf while I made non-committal sounds. What had I done, really? Loved her? Supported her? Saved for her future while wearing the same winter coat 5 years in a row? Were those things that demanded gratitude? Or were they just what mothers did? After we hung up, I sat at my computer and opened the folder I'd promised myself I wouldn't touch. Sophie's wedding plans. Document after document appeared. Vendor. Comparisons. Budget spreadsheets. A Pinterest board with over 200 pins organized by category. Months of research and dreams condensed into digital files she'd never see. My mouse hovered over the delete button. One click and I could erase it all, pretend I'd never been the mother who overstepped, who assumed, who planned for a day that wasn't mine to plan. But I couldn't do it. Instead, I closed the laptop and made tea, standing at the window while it steeped. That's when I saw it. A Rosewood Manor delivery van parked across the street at the Hendersons' house. They were setting up for their daughter, Amy's graduation party, the same Amy who used to play dress-up with Sophie in our backyard. The van's logo triggered a memory so sharp it made me set down my mug. 6 months ago, a random Thursday when Sophie had called me crying. Marcus's mother had made some cutting remark about Sophie's background, something about new money and state school graduates. Sophie had been devastated, worried Marcus's family would never accept her, that the differences between their worlds were too vast to bridge. I'd spent 2 hours on the phone that night, reassuring her, building her back up. And in a moment of protective maternal instinct, I'd done something I hadn't told anyone about. I'd called Rosewood Manor, the prestigious venue where Evelyn Chen Williams had held every major family event for decades, and I'd reserved it. The entire venue. For September 15th. It was meant to be a gift. A way to show Marcus's family that Sophie belonged in their world, that we could play on their field. The deposit had wiped out most of my savings. The money I'd been setting aside for a trip to Ireland, Harold didn't even know I'd been planning. But it felt worth it. imagining Sophie's face when I surprised her with the perfect venue, the one that would make even Evelyn nod in approval. Now, staring at that delivery van, the full weight of my foolishness crashed over me. I'd reserved a venue for a wedding I wasn't allowed to plan, spent money I couldn't afford to lose, all for a daughter who saw me as someone to be managed rather than included. The invitation arrived the following Tuesday. I'd been expecting it, of course. Sophie had mentioned save the dates went out weeks ago, but holding the actual invitation felt different. Official, final, Ms. Joan Roberts and Mr. Harold Roberts request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of Sophie Catherine Roberts to Marcus Chen Williams. The venue line made me laugh, sharp and bitter. The Meridian Hotel. A perfectly nice place, modern and sleek, exactly the kind of venue that photographed well for Instagram, but had no soul, no history. Nothing like Rosewood Manor with its gardens and gazebo, and 3 generations of Chen Williams, celebrations embedded in its walls. I set the invitation on the counter and reached for my phone. Not to call Sophie. Not anymore. The number I dialed connected me to Rosewood Manor's event coordinator, the same woman who'd helped me choose the garden pavilion option and suggested the heritage rose arrangements. "Mrs. Roberts," she greeted warmly, "checking in about the September booking? We're so looking forward to the Catherine Roberts wedding." Catherine. I'd used my middle name when making the reservation, paranoid even then that Sophie might somehow find out and spoil the surprise. The irony tasted like copper in my mouth. "Actually," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, "I need to cancel the reception." The coordinator's pause stretched long enough that I could hear her typing. "I see. May I ask if there's a problem with our services? We could certainly discuss alternatives." "No problem with your services." I stared at the invitation, at my name printed in elegant script that managed to make Joan Roberts look like an afterthought. "The wedding plans have changed." More typing, a diplomatic clearing of throat. "Mrs. Roberts, I should remind you that we're well past the refund window. The deposit—" "I understand," I interrupted. "I'm not asking for a refund. I just need to cancel." After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen, the same kitchen where Sophie had taken her first steps, where she'd sobbed over her first heartbreak, where she'd told us she'd gotten into Columbia for graduate school. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny celebrations I no longer felt invited to join. Harold found me there an hour later, still standing at the counter, the invitation beside me like evidence at a crime scene. "You all right?" He set his golf bag by the door, a new habit that would have annoyed me 6 months ago. Now it barely registered. "I canceled Rosewood Manor," I said. He frowned, that particular expression that meant he was trying to navigate emotional terrain without a map. "What's Rosewood Manor?" Of course he didn't know. I'd kept the secret even from him, planning to surprise everyone with my gift. "A wedding venue. I'd reserved it for Sophie." "But—" He picked up the invitation, squinting at the small print. "Says here they're having it at the Meridian." "Yes." I took the invitation from his hands, running my thumb over the embossed letters. "They are." Harold studied me with the careful attention of a man who'd learned which silences were safe and which were minefields. "How much was the deposit?" I told him. He whistled low, then pulled out a kitchen chair and sat heavily. "Joan, that was your Ireland money." "Yes." "The trip you've been planning since your cousins visited 5 years ago." "Yes." He rubbed his face, a gesture that had become more frequent lately. We were both getting older, carrying more weight than just years. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted it to be perfect." The words came out small, tired. I wanted to give her something that would show Marcus's family she belonged. Something that would make her proud to be our daughter. Harold reached across the table and took my hand. His fingers were rough from golf and gardening, familiar as my own heartbeat. She is proud, Joe, in her way. But his voice lacked conviction, and we both knew it. Pride wouldn't have banned me from planning. Pride wouldn't have scheduled the wedding on my father's birthday without acknowledgement. Pride wouldn't have reduced me to a line on an invitation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Harold's snoring form and stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment that had led to this point. Not just the recent wounds, but years of small distances I'd attributed to normal growing up. Sophie pulling away from hugs in high school, choosing to spend holidays with friends' families in college. The way she'd started introducing me as Joan at professional functions instead of my mom. When had I become someone to manage rather than someone to love? At 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and padded downstairs. The house felt different in darkness, full of shadows that used to be memories. Sophie's height marks on the doorframe, painted over but still visible if you knew where to look. The corner where we'd put the Christmas tree every year, where she'd leave elaborate notes for Santa until she was far too old to believe. I made chamomile tea and opened my laptop, planning to delete the wedding folder once and for all. Instead, I found myself typing a different search. When adult children distance themselves from parents. The results overwhelmed me. Article after article about boundaries, toxic relationships, emotional labor. Terms I didn't fully understand applied to situations I couldn't recognize. Was I toxic? Had I been overbearing? The examples in the articles seemed extreme. Parents who showed up uninvited, who made scenes, who demanded constant attention. I'd sent emails about centerpieces. I'd reserved a venue. Were those equivalent crimes? One article mentioned something called emotional enmeshment, where parents couldn't separate their own dreams from their children's lives. I closed the laptop before I could read more, but the phrase lingered like smoke. Dawn arrived gray and hesitant, matching my mood. I made coffee and sat on the back porch, watching the garden come alive. The roses I'd planted when Sophie was born had grown wild, climbing the fence with ambitious reach. They'd bloom soon, deep red like the dress I'd worn to Sophie's kindergarten graduation. My phone buzzed. Patricia, checking in from Oregon where it was still yesterday. "How are you holding up?" I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on. "I'm figuring it out." "Want me to fly out?" "I can be there by tomorrow." The offer warmed something in my chest, but I declined. This wasn't something Patricia could fix with righteous anger and sisterly support. This was between Sophie and me, or maybe just between me and the mother. I'd thought I was. A week later, Sophie called. Her voice bright with wedding excitement, she chattered about dress fittings and menu tastings as if we'd never had that conversation at Willowbrook Cafe. I made appropriate sounds at appropriate intervals, playing the role she'd cast me in. Supportive but distant mother, interested but not too interested. "Oh," she said near the end, casual as an afterthought. "Marcus's mom knows someone at Rosewood Manor. She mentioned they had a last-minute cancellation for September. Isn't that funny? Like fate or something. But we're happy with the Meridian. Better parking." Better parking. The venue I'd chosen for its history, its gardens, its legacy, reduced to a parking comparison. I made some non-committal sound and changed the subject to her work, safe territory where I couldn't overstep. After we hung up, I sat with the phone, in my lap, understanding finally dawning. This wasn't about the wedding, not really. It was about Sophie creating a life where I was a supporting character rather than a lead, where my dreams for her were burdens to shed rather than gifts to receive. The strangest part was the relief mixed in with the pain, like finally getting a diagnosis for an illness you'd suffered with for years. It didn't cure anything, but at least now I knew what to call it: distance. Such a small word for such a vast space. The jewelry box lived on the top shelf of my closet, wrapped in tissue paper that had yellowed with age. I hadn't opened it in years, preferring to keep the memories inside preserved like flowers pressed between pages. But that evening, after another surface-level text exchange with Sophie about the weather, I found myself reaching for it. Inside, nestled in velvet that still held its deep blue color, lay my mother's pearl necklace. 3 strands of perfectly matched pearls with a sapphire clasp, the kind of piece that belonged in a different era, when women wore gloves to luncheons and knew which fork to use for oysters. My mother had worn it to her wedding in 1952 and her mother before that in 1921. I'd worn it to mine, feeling the weight of generations around my neck. I lifted the necklace, watching how the pearls caught the lamplight. Each one had been chosen for its luster, its size, its perfection. Together they created something timeless, meant to be passed down like recipes and stories, and the shape of our smiles. Sophie had loved this necklace as a child. She'd begged to try it on, standing on my vanity chair to see herself in the mirror, 5 years old and draped in pearls that hung past her belly button. "When I get married," she'd announce with the certainty children possess about futures they can't imagine, "I'm wearing Grandma's necklace just like you." I'd promised it to her then, that little girl playing dress-up in my bedroom. Promised her the pearls and the stories that came with them. How my mother had saved for months to have the clasp repaired before her wedding. How she'd let me wear them to my senior prom, making me promise to guard them with my life. How she'd touched them during her final days in the hospital, too weak to speak but still able to trace the familiar shapes with trembling fingers. Now I sat on my bed, pearls pooled in my lap, wondering if Sophie even remembered they existed. The necklace went back in its box that night, but the questions it raised stayed with me. Over the following days, I found myself cataloging other things Sophie had forgotten or chosen to forget. The recipe box filled with her great-grandmother's handwriting, the christening gown 4 generations of Roberts women had worn, the wedding ring quilt my mother had started for her before the cancer made her fingers too weak to hold a needle. Each item told a story Sophie no longer seemed interested in hearing. But worse than her disinterest was my growing realization that I'd been holding on to these things like life preservers, as if tradition could somehow bridge the distance between us. As if the right heirloom at the right moment could make her see me as more than an obligation to manage. Harold noticed. My mood, of course. After 40 years, he'd developed a radar for my emotional weather patterns. He started bringing home flowers every Friday. Nothing fancy, just grocery store bouquets he'd grab with the milk and bread. He'd place them on the kitchen table without comment, his way of saying he saw me struggling even if he didn't understand. Why? One evening, as I arranged yellow roses in a vase, he cleared his throat in that preparatory way that meant he'd been rehearsing something. "Maybe we should take that Ireland trip anyway." I looked up from the flowers. "With what money?" "I spent it on a venue deposit we'll never get back." "We have savings. That's for emergencies." "Joe." He sat across from me, his reading glasses perched on his head in the way that always made him look like an absent-minded professor. "You've been having an emergency for months. You just won't admit it." The roses blurred as tears threatened. I focused on arranging them, anything to avoid meeting his eyes. "She's getting married, Harold. Our only daughter. I should be happy." Should and are don't always match up. He reached across the table, stilling my hands. "When's the last time you were happy? Really happy? Not pretending for Sophie or anyone else?" I tried to remember. There had been moments, surely. Pleasant dinners, good books, sunny afternoons, in the garden. But real happiness, the kind that bubbled up from somewhere deep and true? I couldn't place it. "I don't know," I admitted. Harold squeezed my hands. "Then maybe it's time to figure that out." That night, I lay awake thinking about happiness. Such a simple concept that had somehow become complicated. When Sophie was little, happiness was easy to identify. Her laughter at peekaboo, the weight of her sleeping against my chest, her hand in mine as we walked to school. Clear, perfect moments strung together like those pearls gathering dust in my closet. When had it become so conditional? Happiness if Sophie called. Happiness if she included me. Happiness if she needed me. I tethered my joy to someone who was actively cutting the ropes. The next morning brought another wedding-related text from Sophie. "Mom, what's your dress size? Evelyn's personal shopper is coordinating the mother's dresses." Evelyn's personal shopper. Not Sophie. Not even a pretense of shopping together. Just a stranger who would select something appropriate for the mother of the bride to wear while sitting in her designated spot, playing her designated role. I stared at the text for a long time before responding with my size and nothing else. Sophie sent back a thumbs-up emoji. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds. This was what we'd become. Logistics and emoji, the language of polite distance. That afternoon, I drove past Rosewood Manor. I'm not sure what compelled me. Maybe I needed to see what I'd given up, what I'd spent my savings on. The venue sat on a hill overlooking the valley, all limestone and climbing ivy, looking like something from a fairy tale. The kind of place where stories began, not ended. I parked across the street and watched a wedding party taking photos in the garden. The bride laughed as her veil caught in the breeze, her mother beside her, adjusting the train with practiced hands. They moved in sync, the mother anticipating what the daughter needed before she asked. The photographer captured their embrace, and even from my distance I could see the joy in it. Uncomplicated, mutual, real. My phone rang, Patricia's name lighting up the screen. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. "You should come, visit, spend a few weeks in Oregon, get some distance from all this." "I can't just leave. The wedding is 7 months away. And from what you've told me, your presence isn't exactly required for planning." She had a point, though it stung, to acknowledge it. What was keeping me here? The hope that Sophie would suddenly call and apologize? That she'd realize what she was losing and beg me to help with centerpieces and seating charts? "I'll think about it," I said, watching the wedding party move toward the mansion. Do more than think. Book a flight. You need to remember who Joan is when she's not trying to be someone's perfect mother. After we hung up, I sat in my car a while longer, engine off, watching strangers celebrate love. The bride's mother helped bustle the train for the reception entrance, their heads bent, together in concentration. Such a small task, but done with such care. The kind of moment I'd imagined having with Sophie 1,000 times. I drove home the long way, past the elementary school where Sophie had performed in countless holiday pageants, past the park where she'd learned to ride a bike, Harold running behind with his hand on the seat, promising he wouldn't let go even as he already had, past Willowbrook Cafe, where everything had shifted 3 weeks ago. At home, I found Harold in his study, surrounded by golf magazines and ESPN playing softly on the television. He looked up when I entered, marking his place with his finger. "I might visit Patricia," I said. His eyebrows rose slightly. "When?" "Soon, maybe next week." He studied me with that careful expression of a man navigating unfamiliar emotional territory. "For how long?" "I don't know. A few weeks, maybe." He nodded slowly. "Might be good. Clear your head." I loved him for not making it bigger than it was, for not asking if this was about Sophie or pointing out that I'd never taken a trip alone in 40 years of marriage. Harold had many flaws, but he knew when to give space. That evening, I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't done in years. Looked at flights for myself. Not family trips planned around school schedules and budgets. Not visits to relatives. Timed with holidays. Just me, going somewhere because I wanted to. The freedom of it felt foreign and thrilling. I bookmarked several options to Portland, then, on impulse, searched for flights to Dublin. The prices made me wince, especially knowing my Ireland fund was now paying for an empty venue on September 15th. But I stared at the screen anyway, imagining myself walking streets my ancestors had known, free from the weight of being someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's disappointment. My phone buzzed. Sophie again. A photo this time, her in a wedding dress at what must have been her fitting. She looked radiant, all ivory silk and delicate beading, her hair swept up to show the graceful line of her neck. The dress was everything I would have chosen for her, classic and elegant with just enough modern touches to make it hers. "What do you think?" her text asked. She was beautiful. My baby girl transformed into a bride, even if I'd been excluded from the transformation. I typed back, "You look perfect, sweetheart." 3 dots appeared showing she was typing. They started and stopped several times before her response came through. "Thanks, Mom. Evelyn helped me choose. She has incredible taste." Evelyn. Of course. Evelyn got to zip the dress, adjust the veil, share the mirror with my daughter as she became a bride. Evelyn with her connections and her perfect taste and her federal judgeship that somehow qualified her to fill spaces I'd been removed from. I set the phone aside without responding. What was there to say? That it should have been me in that fitting room? That I'd imagined this moment since before Sophie was born? That being reduced to receiving photos like a distant relative was a pain I couldn't name? Harold appeared in the doorway. "Dinner?" "I'm not hungry." He didn't push, just nodded and retreated to the kitchen where I heard him making a sandwich. The sounds of ordinary life. Cupboards opening, plates clinking, the refrigerator humming. How many meals had I made in that kitchen? How many times? Had Sophie sat at that table, telling me about her day while I chopped vegetables and pretended I wasn't memorizing every word? I pulled up the Portland flights again. Patricia lived in a craftsman house near Mount Hood, all wooden beams and big windows overlooking the forest. She made pottery now, having taken it up after her divorce 5 years ago. Her Instagram showed bowls and vases in earth tones, her hands shaping clay into something useful and beautiful. Maybe that's what I needed. New shapes. New purposes. Before I could talk myself out of it, I booked a flight for the following Tuesday, 3 weeks in Oregon. Long enough to miss Easter with Sophie, though given our current dynamic, she might not even notice. I closed the laptop feeling lighter and heavier simultaneously, like I'd cut an anchor loose but wasn't sure I remembered how to swim. The next few days passed in preparation. I made lists for Harold, which bills needed paying when, where, to find the spare key, how to work the new coffee maker Sophie had given us for Christmas. He watched me with mild amusement, assuring me he'd survived business trips before. But this was different. This wasn't obligation or necessity. This was choice. Sophie didn't call. Our text exchanges remained surface level, discussing weather, and work with the careful distance of acquaintances. I didn't mention my trip. Some rebellious part of me wanted her to find out after I'd gone, to feel the surprise of my absence the way I'd felt the surprise of my exclusion. The day before, my flight, I walked through the house like a tourist in my own life. The formal dining room we rarely used, waiting for holiday gatherings that happened less frequently each year. Sophie's old room, converted to a guest space but still holding traces of her. A jewelry box on the dresser, certificates of achievement. I couldn't bear to pack away. The kitchen where I'd taught her to make pie crust, her small hands working beside mine, flour in her hair and concentration on her face. Every room held a version of us that no longer existed. The mother and daughter who baked together, who shared secrets over tea, who planned futures that included each other. I wondered if houses could be haunted by living people, by relationships, that died, but left their ghosts behind. That night, as Harold packed his golf clothes for a tournament the following week, he said, "You know this isn't your fault, right? Whatever's happening with Sophie. I folded a sweater, considering. Maybe it is, though. Maybe I held on too tight or loved too much or… Stop. He turned from his suitcase, fixing me with the steady gaze that had anchored me for 4 decades. You loved her exactly right. Sometimes kids just need to push away to figure out who they are. Doesn't mean you did anything wrong. She's 28, Harold, not a teenager finding herself. Maybe it takes some people longer. He went back to packing, but added softly, or maybe she's making a mistake she'll realize later. Either way, you killing yourself trying to fix it won't help. I wanted to argue, to defend my efforts, my dreams, my hurt. But he was right. I'd spent months trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, blaming myself for patterns I couldn't see. Maybe it was time to stop trying. The morning of my flight dawned bright and clear. Harold drove me to the airport, NPR playing softly as we navigated familiar streets. At the departure gate, he hugged me longer than usual. "Take care of yourself. Out there," he said. "And I mean that. Take care of Joan, not Sophie's mother. Just Joan." I kissed him goodbye, tasting coffee and the mint gum he always chewed. "I'll try." The security line moved slowly, giving me time to second guess. Was I running away, abandoning my post as mother of the bride? But as I placed my shoes in the bin and walked through the scanner, I felt something shift. I wasn't running from anything. For the first time in months, maybe years, I was moving toward something, even if I didn't know what it was yet. At the gate, my phone chimed. Sophie, asking if I could pick up some specific tea Evelyn liked for the shower. Not her shower. The shower. As if I were hired help being given a shopping list. I stared at the text as they called my boarding group. Then I typed back, "I'm traveling for a few weeks. Try Whole Foods." Her response came quickly. "Traveling? Where? Is everything okay?" I could have explained, could have smoothed it over with reassurances and details. Instead, I typed, "Everything's fine. Have a good month." Then I turned off my phone and boarded the plane. As we lifted off, I watched the city shrink below, the patterns of streets and houses I knew by heart becoming abstract geometry. Somewhere, down there, Sophie was probably staring at her phone, confused by my sudden unavailability. Somewhere down there, Rosewood Manor sat empty on a hill, waiting for a wedding that would happen elsewhere. But up here, suspended between earth and sky, I was just a woman in seat 14A, heading west toward something that might look like happiness, or at least like beginning. Patricia's house smelled like cedar and clay, a combination that immediately unwound something in my chest. She met me at the door wearing a paint-splattered apron, her gray hair twisted up with what appeared to be a chopstick, looking nothing like the corporate executive she'd been before retirement. "You made it," she said, pulling me into a hug that lasted long enough for my travel tension to melt. "You look tired." "I look old," I corrected, managing a smile. "We're all old, honey. The question is what we're doing with it." She led me, through rooms filled with pottery in various stages, past windows overlooking Douglas firs so tall they seemed to brush the clouds. The guest room she'd prepared had a quilt on the bed and fresh wildflowers on the nightstand. It looked nothing like my house, nothing like my life, and that was exactly what I needed. That first week passed in a blur of sleeping late and drinking. Coffee on Patricia's deck while fog rolled through the trees. She didn't push me to talk about Sophie or the wedding or anything heavy. Instead, she taught me to throw clay on her wheel, laughing when my first attempts collapsed into lumpy disasters. "The clay knows if you're fighting it," she explained, her hands guiding mine. "You have to work with what it wants to become, not force it into what you think it should be." I thought about that as my third bowl attempt folded in on itself. How much of my life had I spent forcing things into shapes they didn't want to hold? My phone stayed mostly silent. Harold texted daily updates about the house, the weather, his golf scores. Sophie sent exactly 3 messages the entire first week, all logistics about the wedding that assumed I'd be back in time to handle whatever task she'd assigned. I responded briefly, gave no return date, offered no explanations. "You're different," Patricia observed one evening as we sat by her fire pit, wine glasses in hand. "Quieter, but also louder, if that makes sense." "It doesn't," I said, but I smiled. "You're not apologizing for taking up space anymore. It's good." I sipped my wine, watching flames dance against the darkening sky. I didn't realize I was apologizing before. Every time you made yourself smaller so Sophie could feel bigger. Every time you swallowed what you wanted to say. That's all apology, Joan. Saying sorry for existing too much. The truth of it stung. I had become an apology, hadn't I? Sorry for caring too much, planning too much, wanting too much from a daughter who needed me to want less. "When did you get so wise?" I asked. "When David left me for his 28-year-old assistant?" Patricia said dryly. "Amazing how clear things become when your life explodes." We laughed, the kind of bitter-edged laughter that comes from surviving things that should have destroyed you. Patricia had rebuilt herself from that divorce, found new purpose in clay and solitude and the rhythm of her own choices. Maybe I could do the same, even if my explosion had been slower, quieter, shaped like a wedding invitation that reduced me to a line of text. The second week brought unexpected peace. I established routines that belonged only to me. Morning walks through the woods behind Patricia's house. Afternoons at the pottery wheel, finally producing bowls that could hold their shape. Evenings reading books I'd bought years ago but never opened, too busy being available for a daughter who no longer needed me. I discovered I liked salmon. For 40 years, I'd avoided it because Harold found it too fishy. But here in Oregon, Patricia grilled it with lemon and dill, and I ate it like someone discovering food for the first time. I discovered I liked silence too, real silence, not the kind filled with waiting for the phone to ring. One afternoon, while Patricia was at the farmer's market, I sat at her computer and did something I'd been avoiding, checked Sophie's social media. Her Instagram feed bloomed with wedding content, dress shopping photos with Evelyn, cake tasting with Marcus, venue tours I hadn't known about, each image carefully curated, hashtagged tracker Chen Williams' wedding, as if the Roberts name had already been erased. In every photo, Sophie glowed with happiness I couldn't begrudge her. She looked confident, sophisticated, every inch the successful young woman I'd raised her to be. But she also looked complete without me, and that truth sat heavy in my chest, like a stone I couldn't swallow or spit out. One post stopped me cold. A photo of Sophie and Evelyn at what appeared to be a stationery store, examining invitation samples. The caption read, "So grateful for my bonus mom helping make every detail perfect. Cheer blessed, Chink mother of the groom. New traditions. Bonus mom. New traditions." Each word carefully chosen to paint a picture of the wedding Sophie wanted, the family she was choosing. I closed the laptop and went to the pottery studio, where I threw clay with enough force to make Patricia's cat flee the room. That night, Harold called instead of texting. "You okay? You've been quiet." "I'm learning to make bowls," I said, which wasn't really an answer. "Good for you." He paused. "Sophie asked for your flight information. Wants to pick you up from the airport." "What did you tell her?" "That I didn't know it." "Which is true, since you haven't told me when you're coming back." I could hear the question in his statement, the gentle probe for a timeline. But I didn't have one. How do you know when you're done becoming someone new? When the person you're discovering finally feels more real than the one you left behind? "I'll let you know," I said softly. "When I know." He accepted that, as he'd accepted so many things over the years. We talked about mundane things, the leak in the garage he'd finally fixed, the neighbor's new dog that wouldn't stop barking, his plans to play in a tournament next month. Normal married conversation, but it felt different now. Like we were two people choosing to be married, rather than just maintaining a decades-old habit. After we hung up, I sat on Patricia's deck, wrapped in a blanket, watching stars I never saw in the light-polluted skies at home. The Milky Way stretched above. Me, millions of lights that had been there all along, just waiting for me to get somewhere dark enough to see them. The third week brought a shift. I stopped checking my phone first thing in the morning, stopped calculating what Sophie might be doing, what wedding tasks were happening without me. I started writing instead, long, rambling journal entries that began as complaints and evolved into something else. Recognition, maybe. Or release. I wrote about the Christmas morning when Sophie was 7, how she'd woken us at dawn to show off the fairy wings she'd found under the tree, how she'd worn them all day, even to dinner, her joy so pure it made my chest ache. I wrote about teaching, her to drive, white-knuckling the door handle while she lurched through parking lots, both of us pretending we weren't terrified. I wrote about the day she left for college, how I'd cried in her empty room, touching things she'd left behind like artifacts of a civilization that had moved on. But I also wrote about myself. The art classes I'd given up when Sophie was born because the schedule conflicted with Mommy and me swimming. The promotion I'd turned down because it would have meant traveling, being away from bedtimes and school plays. The friendships I'd let fade because maintaining them felt selfish when there was always something Sophie needed, something I could be doing for my family. I gave up pieces of myself one at a time, I wrote one morning. So slowly I didn't notice, until I went looking for them and found empty spaces instead. Patricia read some of these entries at my invitation, nodding over her coffee. "You know what strikes me?" she said. "You keep saying you gave these things up for Sophie. But did she ask you to? Or did you decide that's what good mothers do?" The question haunted me for days. Had Sophie demanded I quit art classes? Had she insisted I turn down the promotion? Or had I made those choices myself, constructing an altar of sacrifice that she'd never asked me to build? One evening, while I struggled with a particularly stubborn piece of clay, my phone rang. Sophie's face appeared on the screen, the professional headshot she used for everything now. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. "Mom?" Her voice was tight with something. Anger? Worry? "Where are you? Dad won't tell me anything except that you're traveling." "I'm in Oregon," I said carefully, "visiting Patricia." "For 3 weeks? Without telling me?" "You were busy with wedding planning. I didn't want to intrude." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if we'd lost connection. Then Sophie laughed, short and sharp. "So this is what? Punishment? I don't include you in planning so you disappear?" "It's not punishment," I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. "It's just space, the kind you asked for." "I asked for space with wedding planning, not for you to vanish off the face of the earth." "I'm hardly vanished. I'm visiting my sister." "People do that." "Not you," Sophie shot back. "You don't just leave. You don't just go." And there it was. The image she had of me, as fixed and reliable as furniture. Always there. Always available. Always waiting. The mother who didn't take trips alone, who didn't have desires that conflicted with family needs, who existed in relation to others, rather than as herself. "Maybe that's been the problem," I said quietly. Sophie made a frustrated sound. "Look, can you just come home? The shower is in 2 weeks and Evelyn's been asking about you. It's embarrassing that I don't know where my own mother is, or when she's coming back." Embarrassing, not concerning, not loving, just embarrassing. What would the Chen Williams family think about a mother who didn't stay in her designated place? "I'll be back when I'm back," I said, the words feeling foreign and powerful. "Give Evelyn my regards." I hung up before Sophie could respond. my hands shaking slightly. Patricia appeared in the doorway, eyebrows raised. "I just hung up on my daughter," I said, amazed. "Good for you," Patricia said simply. "Now come help me glaze. These bowls won't finish themselves." That night, I couldn't concentrate on the glazing. My hands moved through the motions, but my mind kept circling back to Sophie's voice, the indignation in it. How dare I not be where she expected? How dare I have plans she didn't approve? But underneath the guilt that tried to surface, something else bloomed. A quiet recognition that Sophie's anger wasn't really about my absence. It was about her loss of control, the sudden realization that I was a person who could make choices that didn't revolve around her. And maybe that was exactly what we both needed. The next morning brought a barrage of texts, from Sophie, demanding a return date. From Harold, gently suggesting that perhaps I'd made my point. Even from Brina's old friend Jessica, who was apparently now in the wedding party and had been tasked with reaching out. I ignored them all and went for my walk, letting the silence swallow the noise of other people's expectations. The path wound through old growth trees, their trunks wider than my car, their age making every human concern seem temporary. These trees had stood before I was born, before Sophie was born, before any of our small dramas unfolded. They'd be here after we were gone, patient and unchanging, growing toward their own purposes. When I returned, Patricia was throwing a vase. On her wheel, her movements confident and sure. "You know," she said without looking up, "you could stay longer. Through the summer if you want. I like having you here." The offer sat between us like a gift I wasn't sure I could accept. Stay. Through the summer meant missing the shower, the bachelorette party, all the pre-wedding events I hadn't been invited to anyway. It meant making my absence not just a statement but a choice. "I'll think about it," I said, but we both knew I was already thinking. That afternoon, I made my best bowl yet. The clay yielded under my hands, rising into something balanced and useful. Patricia showed me how to carve a design into the bottom before firing, a maker's mark that would survive the kiln. "What should I put?" I asked, tool poised over the soft clay. "Whatever feels true," she said. I thought for a moment, then carved my initials. Not JR for Joan Roberts, the married name I'd worn for 40 years, but JMH. Joan Marie Harper. The name I'd been born with, the one I'd signed on my first apartment lease, my college diploma, my dreams before they got tangled up with other people's needs. The letters looked strange and familiar at once, like meeting an old friend after decades apart. But as I set the bowl aside to dry, I felt something settle in my chest. A claiming, maybe, or a remembering. That evening, I opened my laptop and did something I hadn't done in years, searched for art classes. Portland had dozens of options. Life drawing, watercolors, abstract expression. My mouse hovered over a link for Rediscovering Your Artist Self, a workshop for women over 60. Before I could talk myself out of it, I enrolled. The art workshop met in a converted warehouse in southeast Portland, all exposed beams and paint-splattered floors that spoke of decades of creative messes. I arrived early, clutching a new sketchbook like a life preserver, wondering what I was doing there among strangers who probably hadn't let their artistic selves atrophy for 30 years. The instructor, a woman named Ruth with silver braids and paint under her fingernails, greeted me with the kind of smile that suggested she'd seen nervous returners before. "First time back?" she asked gently. "First time in a very long time," I admitted. "The hands remember," she said. "Even when we think they've forgotten." 12 women eventually filled the space, all of us past 60, all carrying that particular combination of excitement and terror that comes from reclaiming abandoned parts of ourselves. We introduced ourselves in a circle, and I heard my own story echoed in different keys. The pianist who stopped playing when her husband complained about the noise. The sculptor who packed away her tools when grandchildren arrived needing babysitting. the photographer who sold her equipment to pay for her son's rehab. "We're not here to judge what we create," Ruth announced as we prepared our materials. "We're here to remember what creating feels like." My first attempts were disasters. My hands, so used to practical tasks like folding laundry and signing permission slips, trembled as I tried to sketch. The charcoal felt foreign, the paper too white, too full of possibility. Around me, other women struggled too, laughing at their shaky lines and smudged attempts. But Ruth was right. Slowly, my hands began to remember. The way charcoal could be coaxed into shadows. How negative space could define a shape better than lines. By the session's end, I'd produced something that wasn't good, but was undeniably mine. A rough sketch of Patricia's kitchen window, the light falling through it like forgiveness. I drove back to Patricia's house in a daze, fingers still gray, with charcoal, mind buzzing with possibilities. Patricia took one look at me and grinned. "There she is," she said. "There's Joan." That night, Harold called with news. "Sophie came by the house today. She was upset." "About what?" I asked, though I could guess. "About you. About the wedding. About Evelyn asking questions she can't answer." He paused. "She went through the photo albums, the old ones from the hallway closet, left them scattered all over the living room floor." I pictured it, Sophie surrounded by evidence of the life we'd built together, searching for something. Answers? Justification? Proof that I'd always been unreliable, selfish, absent. But those albums would show her the opposite. Page after page of me present, attentive, centering my world around hers. "What did she say?" I asked. "Not much, just sat there looking at pictures and crying. I made her tea, but she didn't want to talk. Not to me, anyway." The old me would have been on the next flight home, ready to comfort, to fix, to apologize for causing tears. But sitting in Patricia's guest room with charcoal still under my fingernails, I felt only a distant sadness. Sophie was grieving something. But maybe it needed grieving, maybe we both did. "Thank you for telling me," I said simply. "Joe." Harold's voice carried 40 years of knowing me. "You're not coming back for the shower, are you?" "No," I said, surprising myself with the certainty. "I'm not." He was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I'll handle whatever comes up." "Harold, I stopped, unsure how to express what I felt. Gratitude? Love? Regret that it had taken me this long to step outside the box I'd built around myself? "I know," he said gently. "Take your time. Figure out what you need." After we hung up, I sat sketching in my new notebook, trying to capture the feeling of that phone call. Not the words, but the weight of them, the shape of a marriage that could bend without breaking. My phone buzzed with incoming texts, but I didn't check them. Whatever crisis or demand or guilt trip they contained could wait. The next morning brought an email that changed everything. Not from Sophie, but from Evelyn Chen Williams herself. Her federal judge email signature sat below a message that was professionally worded, but unmistakably pointed. "Dear Joan, I hope this message finds you well. As we approach the final months before Marcus and Sophie's wedding, I find myself concerned about your recent absence. Sophie seems quite distressed, and I must admit, I'm puzzled by your choice to extend your travels during such a significant time. I realize every family has different dynamics, but in the Chen Williams family, we prioritize presence during major life events. I had hoped, given Sophie's integration into our family, that we might align on these values. If there are concerns about your role or the planning process, I would welcome a conversation. I've taken a special interest in ensuring Sophie feels supported, as I'm sure you understand how challenging it can be to navigate between families during wedding planning. I hope you'll consider returning soon. Sophie needs her mother, even if she struggles to express it. Best regards, Evelyn Chen Williams. I read it 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of condescension wrapped in concern. The subtle digs at my parenting, the implication that I was failing Sophie by honoring her request for space, the positioning of herself as the stable, present maternal figure, the threat dressed as care. Patricia read it over my shoulder, muttering, increasingly creative profanity with each paragraph. "The nerve," she finally exploded. "The absolute gall of this woman. Prioritize presence. She's the one who helped push you out." But I felt oddly calm. Maybe it was the morning light through the kitchen window or the successful bowl I'd thrown the day before, now waiting to be fired. Maybe it was the charcoal under my fingernails or the bruise on my hip from bumping into the pottery wheel. Physical evidence that I was living, creating, taking up space in ways that had nothing to do with Sophie's wedding. "I'm going to respond," I said. Patricia raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Sometimes silence is the best response to people like this. "No," I said, opening my laptop. "She wants a conversation about values and presence? She'll get one." I typed, carefully measuring each word. "Dear Evelyn, thank you for your concern. I appreciate your interest in my family's dynamics, though I must confess equal puzzlement at your need to insert yourself into them. My presence in Sophie's life extends far beyond these few weeks. 28 years of midnight fevers, homework struggles, heartbreaks, and triumphs. Every dance recital, every science fair, every moment that built the accomplished woman you now mentor through wedding planning. If Sophie is distressed by my absence, she knows how to reach me. The fact that she's chosen to communicate through you instead speaks volumes about the dynamic we're all navigating. As for values, I value authenticity over performance. I value respect over obligations. And I value my daughter enough to honor her explicitly stated wish that I step back completely from her wedding planning. I'm sure you'll continue to provide the support Sophie seeks. After all, she's made it clear that your taste and connections are what she needs right now. I wouldn't want to overshadow that with my presence. Warm regards, Joan Roberts. I hit send before I could reconsider, my maiden name sitting there like a flag planted in new territory. Patricia whooped and poured us both coffee to celebrate, though it was barely 8 in the morning. "You know she's going to show that to Sophie," Patricia warned. "I'm counting on it," I said. The fallout came within hours. My phone rang repeatedly. Sophie, Harold, unknown numbers that were probably Evelyn's various assistants. I let them all go to voicemail and went to my art class, where we were learning about negative space. "Sometimes what's not there defines the image more than what is," Ruth explained, showing us how empty areas created form and meaning. "The absence is as important as the presence." I thought about that as I drew, leaving careful empty spaces that somehow made the filled spaces more meaningful. Wasn't that what I was doing now? Creating negative space in my life, in Sophie's life, that might finally help us see each other clearly? My phone had 17 voicemails by the time class ended. I deleted them all without listening and drove to Mount Hood instead. Patricia had shown me a trail that led to a viewpoint where you could see for miles, and I needed that kind of perspective. The hike was harder than I'd expected. My body at 68 protested the elevation gain, the rocky terrain, but I kept going, one step at a time, until I reached the viewpoint and could see the world spread out below like a map of possibilities. I sat on a boulder, catching my breath and watching clouds cast shadows across the valley. My phone buzzed, insistently in my pocket, but I pulled out my sketchbook instead, trying to capture the layers of mountain ridges fading into the distance. A younger couple passed, the woman heavily pregnant, both of them glowing with the particular light of impending parenthood. They smiled at me, probably seeing someone's grandmother out for a gentle hike. They couldn't know I was a refugee from my own life, sitting on a mountain while my daughter's wedding unraveled whatever relationship we had left. But maybe that was okay. Maybe sometimes things needed to unravel to be rewoven into something better. By the time I made it back to Patricia's, the sun was setting and my phone had finally stopped ringing. I found Patricia in her studio, glazing, the bowl I'd made with my maiden initials. "How do you want to finish it?" she asked. I studied the bowl, running my finger along its rim. "Something that won't match anything else," I said. "Something completely its own." She smiled and showed me glazes in impossible colors, teal that shifted to purple, gold that caught fire in the light, green like deep water. I chose a combination that Ruth would have called brave and my mother would have called garish. Patricia helped me apply it, layer by careful layer, until the bowl was transformed. "It might not turn out how you expect," she warned as we placed it in the kiln. "Glazes can be unpredictable." "Good," I said. "I'm done with predictable." That night, I finally checked my messages. Harold had sent a single text. "Sophie got your email to Evelyn. Call when you're ready." From Sophie, a longer message. "I can't believe you would embarrass me like this. Evelyn was trying to help. This is exactly why I didn't want you involved. You make everything about you. The wedding is in 4 months and my own mother is having some kind of breakdown. Thanks for making the most important day of my life. About your midlife crisis." Midlife crisis. At 68. The phrase was so absurd I actually laughed, alone in Patricia's guest room. Is that what this looked like from the outside? A breakdown, a crisis, a selfish grab for attention? But I knew better. This wasn't a crisis. This was a becoming. I opened my laptop and began typing. Not to Sophie. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Instead, I wrote to myself, a letter to the woman I'd been before that birthday invitation arrived. "Dear Joan," I began. "You did the best you could with what you knew." I wrote about the choices made in love that had slowly become cages, about the difference between sacrifice and self-erasure, about how being a good mother had somehow meant being less of a person, until I'd forgotten there was a person there at all. "You saved every report card, every drawing, every Mother's Day card that said you were the best mom in the world," I wrote. "But somewhere along the way, you forgot to save yourself." The letter grew to pages, years of unspoken truths finally finding words. When I finished, dawn was breaking over the mountains, and I felt empty in the best way, like a bowl ready to be filled with something new. Patricia found me on the deck, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sunrise. She handed me coffee and sat beside me, our shoulders touching. "Regrets?" she asked. I considered the question, thinking of Sophie's anger, Evelyn's condescension, the wedding moving forward without me. "No," I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. Pain, yes. Sadness, absolutely. But not regret. "Good," Patricia said. "Regret is just another way of apologizing for who you are." We sat in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up. Somewhere Sophie was probably deep in wedding planning, surrounded by Evelyn's expertise and Marcus's family money. Somewhere, Harold was getting ready for another day of golf and gentle peace. Somewhere, Rosewood Manor sat empty on its hill, waiting for a wedding that would never come. But here, I was learning to draw again, learning to throw pots that didn't match anything else, learning that absence could be as defining as presence, that space could be a gift rather than abandonment. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from Jessica, Sophie's friend. "Mrs. R, I don't know what's going on, but Sophie's pretty upset. The shower is next week. It would mean a lot if you came. She needs you, even if she won't say it." I turned the phone face down without responding. Sophie had been clear about what she needed: space, boundaries, my complete absence from planning. The fact that she was upset now that I'd given her exactly what she'd asked for wasn't my puzzle to solve. "Want to go to the farmer's market?" Patricia asked. "I need clay supplies, and there's a woman who sells the most amazing honey." "Yes," I said. standing and stretching muscles sore from yesterday's hike. Let's go. As we drove into town, I thought about the bowl waiting in the kiln, its glaze transforming in the heat. You couldn't open the kiln early, couldn't rush the process, couldn't control exactly how the colors would emerge. You could only trust that what came out would be beautiful in its own way, even if it looked nothing like what you'd originally planned. Maybe that was true for more than pottery. Maybe it was true for daughters and mothers and the space between them. Maybe the heat of this separation was necessary, transforming us both into something new. The farmer's market bustled with Saturday morning energy. Patricia introduced me to vendors she knew, and I found myself buying things I'd never purchased before: purple carrots, honey infused with lavender, handmade soap that smelled like the forest. Small pleasures I'd denied myself for years, always saving money for Sophie's needs, Sophie's future, Sophie's dreams. At a jewelry stall, a pair of earrings caught my eye. Silver spirals that curved like fiddlehead ferns, nothing like the conservative pearls I'd worn for decades. The artist, a young woman with bright eyes and calloused hands, explained how she'd forged them. "They're about growth," she said. "How things unfold in their own time, in their own way." I bought them immediately, putting them on right there in the market. They swung against my neck as I walked, catching the light, making me feel like someone I was still getting to know. "You look happy," Patricia observed as we loaded our purchases into her car. "I think I might be," I said, touching one of the spiral earrings. "Is that terrible? To be happy when my daughter is suffering because of choices I've made?" Patricia snorted. "Sophie's not suffering. She's adjusting. There's a difference. And her adjustment isn't your responsibility." But part of me wondered if Sophie was suffering, if my absence had created a wound she didn't know how to name. Then I remembered her words. "This is exactly why I didn't want you involved." The clarity of that statement, the certainty that my presence was a problem to be managed. No, I decided as we drove home through tree-lined streets. Sophie wasn't suffering from my absence. She was angry about losing control, about her carefully orchestrated wedding narrative being disrupted. But that wasn't the same as pain. Not the kind of pain that came from being erased from your daughter's life one decision at a time. Back at Patricia's, the kiln had cooled enough to open. We lifted the lid together, peering in at the transformed pieces. My bowl sat there, gleaming with colors I hadn't expected. The teal had deepened to ocean depths, the gold had scattered like stars, the green had become something alive and growing. "It's perfect," Patricia breathed. It wasn't, not in any traditional sense. The colors clashed and swirled in ways that would never match any dining set. One side was slightly thicker than the other, evidence of my beginner's hands. But it was wholly itself, unapologetic and strange and beautiful. I lifted it carefully, feeling its weight, its warmth. This bowl would never hold soup at a family dinner, or sit prettily on a shelf. But it was mine, made by hands that were remembering how to create instead of just serve. That evening, I placed it on my nightstand, where it caught the last light of day. Then I sat down to write again, not to anyone else, but to continue the story I'd started. The story of Joan, not as mother, or wife or disappointment, but as herself, messy and real, and finally learning to take up space without apology. September arrived in Oregon like a gentle friend, bringing crisp mornings and golden afternoons that made everything feel possible. I'd been at Patricia's for nearly 5 months now, long enough that the guest room felt like mine, that the pottery wheel knew my hands, that the barista at the local coffee shop started my order before I reached the counter. The wedding was 2 weeks away. I knew this not because I was counting down, but because Harold had mentioned it in our weekly call. "Casual as weather. Sophie's stressed," he'd said. "The caterer mixed up something, and Evelyn's sister can't make it from Hong Kong. Drama all around." I made appropriate listening sounds while sketching the view from Patricia's deck, my phone tucked between ear and shoulder. These calls had become easier over the months, Harold and I finding a new rhythm that didn't require physical proximity. He'd even started taking cooking classes, tired of frozen dinners and takeout. "Are you going?" he asked finally. The question, we'd both been dancing around for weeks. "I have an invitation," I said, which wasn't really an answer. "That's not what I asked." I set down my charcoal, considering. The invitation had arrived a month ago, addressed to Ms. Joan Roberts, as if I'd become singular again. No +1 for Harold, who'd received his own separate invitation. Another, small erasure, another indication that Sophie saw us as individual obligations rather than a unit. "I don't know," I admitted. "Would it help or hurt if I showed up?" Harold was quiet for a moment. "I think that depends on why you'd be going." That was the question, wasn't it? Would I go out of obligation, playing the role of the supportive mother in my designated seat? Would I go to prove something, that I could be gracious despite everything, that I was bigger than the hurt? Or would I go because somewhere under all the distance and damage, I still loved my daughter and wanted to witness her happiness, even from the margins? "She hasn't called," I said instead of answering. "Not once in 5 months." "I know." "She could have. My number hasn't changed." "I know that too." We ended the call with no resolution, but Harold promised to save me a seat just in case. Always practical, my Harold. Always leaving doors open even when I wasn't sure I wanted to walk through them. That afternoon, I worked on a new piece in the studio, a tall vase that kept wanting to collapse. Patricia watched me struggle, occasionally offering advice, but mostly just being present in that way she'd perfected over the months. "You're fighting it," she observed as the clay wobbled again. "It won't stay up," I said, frustrated. "Then let it lean. Not everything has to stand perfectly straight." I eased my pressure, let the vase find its own center of gravity. It tilted slightly, creating an elegant curve I hadn't planned but suddenly loved. Sometimes the best things came from releasing control, from letting forms become what they needed to be. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. When I opened it, my breath caught. A photo of Sophie in her wedding dress. Not the one from her fitting months ago, but clearly a new one. This dress was sleeker, more sophisticated, all clean lines and subtle beading. She looked beautiful but distant, like someone I might admire in a magazine but wouldn't recognize in a grocery store. The text below the photo read, "Hi, Mrs. Roberts, this is Jessica. Sophie doesn't know I'm sending this. Thought you should see. She looks amazing, but she's been crying a lot. Keep saying something's missing. Anyway, hope you're well." I stared at the photo until my eyes burned. Something missing. Was it me she missed? Or just the idea of a mother who'd play her assigned role without complications? Did she want Joan? Or did she want the performed version of motherhood she'd grown comfortable with? Patricia peered over my shoulder. "She looks like a stranger," she said gently. "She is a stranger," I replied, surprising myself with the lack of bitterness in my voice. It was just truth now, settled and clear as morning light. That evening, I attended my last art class before the workshop series ended. Ruth had us work on self-portraits, but not traditional ones. "Draw who you're becoming," she instructed. "Not who you were or who you are right now, but who you're moving toward." I stared at the blank paper for a long time, then began sketching. What emerged wasn't a face, but a landscape. Mountains giving way to ocean, forests becoming gardens, everything in transition. In the foreground, barely visible, was a figure walking away from the viewer, hair streaming behind her like a flag. You couldn't see her face, but her posture spoke of purpose, of choosing direction rather than being pulled. Ruth studied it during our critique session. "There's such freedom here," she said, "and sadness. But the sadness doesn't stop the movement. No, I agreed. It doesn't. After class, I sat in my car and finally listened to the voicemails I'd been avoiding. They were all from the same day, 4 months ago, a cascade of increasing frustration. Sophie, clipped and professional. Mom, this is getting ridiculous. Call me back. Sophie, less controlled. Jessica says you're taking art classes. Since when do you do art? Is this some kind of statement? Sophie, finally cracking. Fine. Don't call back. I'll just tell everyone my mother is too busy finding herself to care about my wedding. Then Harold, careful and measured. Joe, she's hurting. I know you are too, but maybe... I deleted them all. These were old wounds, old attempts at pulling me back into patterns I'd finally broken free from. Whatever Sophie felt now, 4 months later, wouldn't be captured in those angry messages. When I got back to Patricia's, I found her on the deck with wine and 2 glasses, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple. We'd done this so many evenings now, it felt like our own tradition, born not from obligation but from choice. I've been thinking, Patricia said as I settled beside her. You could stay, permanently. We could convert the garage into a proper studio, sell that big house you're rattling around in back east, start over. The offer hung between us like a door opening onto a completely different life. I could see it so clearly. Mornings at the pottery wheel, afternoons teaching art to other women remembering themselves, evenings on this deck watching seasons change. A life built on my own terms, far from the geography of old disappointments. That's a big decision, I said carefully. Is it? Patricia challenged. Bigger than spending the rest of your life in a house full of ghosts, waiting for calls that don't come. She had a point. What was keeping me in Pennsylvania besides habit and a husband who'd learned to cook for himself and seemed happier for it? What was I holding on to besides memories of a daughter who'd made it clear she preferred me at a distance? That night, I dreamed about Rosewood Manor. In the dream, it was set up for a wedding. My imagined wedding for Sophie, all roses and candlelight and generations of family. But the venue was empty, chairs waiting for guests who'd never arrive, flowers wilting in their vases. I walked through the space in my mother's pearls, touching each perfect detail I'd planned, understanding finally that I'd been decorating a mausoleum for a relationship that had died years before I'd noticed. I woke at dawn with sudden, perfect clarity. I was going to the wedding. Not for Sophie, though I hoped she'd find whatever she was looking for in Marcus and his family. Not for appearances or to prove anything to Evelyn Chen Williams and her assessment of proper maternal behavior. Not even for closure, because I'd found that already in Patricia's studio, in art classes, in the woman I saw in the mirror who wore spiral earrings and had clay under her fingernails. I was going for me. To see this chapter end with my own eyes. To sit in that assigned seat and know with certainty that I'd chosen every step that had led me there. To wear a dress that Evelyn's personal shopper hadn't selected, and remember that being edited out of someone's story didn't mean I couldn't write my own. Patricia understood immediately when I told her over breakfast. You'll need something to wear, she said practically. Something that's absolutely, unapologetically you. We spent the next day in Portland's boutiques, not looking for mother of the bride appropriate, but for Joan appropriate. What we found was a dress in deep emerald green, a color I'd never worn because someone once said it was too bold for me. The dress moved like water, caught light like stained glass, made me look like someone who'd chosen joy over appropriateness. You'll stand out, the sales clerk warned, used to mothers who wanted to blend into the background. Good, I said, handing her my credit card. I flew back east 3 days before the wedding, telling no one. Harold had offered to pick me up from the airport, but I rented a car instead. I needed the control, the ability to leave when I chose. I drove past our house, my house, but didn't stop. Not yet. Instead, I checked into a small hotel downtown, the kind of place I'd never stayed in my own city. The night before the Dayan wedding, I sat in my hotel room and wrote one final letter. Not to Sophie this time, but to the mother I'd been. You loved her with everything you had. You gave until your hands were empty, and then found more to give. You measured your worth in her achievements, your happiness in her smiles, your purpose in her needs. You were a good mother. Maybe too good, if such a thing exists. You forgot that mothers are people too, that sacrifice becomes poison when it leaves nothing behind. But you did your best with the consciousness you had at the time. And when that consciousness changed, you changed too. That takes courage most people never find. Be proud of who you were. Be prouder of who you've become. The morning of September 15th dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect early fall day that wedding planners pray for. I took my time getting ready, doing my own hair and makeup instead of rushing to whatever appointment Sophie might have made for me in another life. The emerald dress fit perfectly. The spiral earrings caught the light, and the woman in the mirror looked like someone I wanted to know better. I arrived at the Meridian Hotel precisely on time, neither early, like an eager mother, nor late like a bitter one. The lobby bustled with wedding guests, and I recognized faces from years of school events and family gatherings. Some did double takes at my appearance, the dress, the earrings, maybe just the way I carried myself now. I smiled and made small talk, mentioning my extended stay in Oregon when asked, offering no explanations or apologies. Evelyn Chen Williams materialized at my elbow in a cloud of expensive perfume and navy silk. "Joan," she said, her professional smile faltering slightly. "We weren't sure you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss Sophie's wedding," I said simply, matching her smile with one of my own. She studied me, taking in the unconventional dress, the artistic earrings, the absence of nervous energy she'd probably expected. "Well," she said finally, "I'm glad you're here. Sophie will be pleased." We both knew that was optimistic, at best, but I appreciated the effort at civility. She glided away to manage something else, leaving me to find my seat in the venue. The ceremony space was beautiful in that impersonal way of expensive hotels. White flowers, white chairs, white everything. Nothing like the riot of color and history Rosewood Manor would have provided, but perfectly appropriate for the clean, controlled event Sophie had apparently wanted. I found my assigned seat, third row, bride's side, next to cousins I hadn't seen in years. Harold was across the aisle in the second row, and he caught my eye with a small smile and nod. Music began, and the wedding party processed in. Jessica walked by in pale pink, meeting my eyes with something like relief. Marcus's groomsmen followed, then the man himself, looking nervous but happy at the altar. Then the music changed to the traditional wedding march, and everyone stood. Sophie appeared at the doorway on Harold's other arm. Apparently, she'd asked him last minute when Patricia had refused to give her away in my absence. She was radiant in that way all brides are, love and nerves and anticipation creating their own light. But as she walked down the aisle, her eyes scanning the crowd, she found me. For a moment, everything else faded. She stumbled slightly. Harold, steadying her, her carefully composed expression cracking just enough for me to see the confusion underneath. I smiled at her, not the bright, proud mother of the bride smile she might have expected, but something smaller and truer. An acknowledgement, a goodbye, a wish for her happiness that had nothing to do with me. She recovered quickly, focusing on Marcus waiting at the altar, and the moment passed. But I'd seen what I needed to see. Surprise, maybe regret. Definitely the realization that I wasn't who she'd expected me to be. The ceremony itself was lovely in a scripted way. They'd written their own vows, full of promises about supporting each other's dreams and building a life together. I listened, for any echo of the values I'd tried to teach. Kindness, loyalty, the importance of staying present even when things got difficult. But these were new vows for a new life, one that didn't reference the past or the people who'd shaped them. When the officiant pronounced them married, Sophie and Marcus kissed to enthusiastic applause. They walked back down the aisle as the Chen Williams, her maiden name already a memory. I clapped with everyone else, genuinely happy for the joy on her face, even if I'd been edited out of the story that got her there. The cocktail hour was where things got interesting. I took a glass of champagne and moved through the crowd with ease I hadn't expected. Without the weight of trying to be the perfect mother of the bride, I could just be a guest. I chatted with Harold's golf buddies, caught up with neighbors, even had a pleasant conversation with Marcus's aunt about pottery techniques. Sophie found me on the terrace, where I'd stepped out for air and a moment of quiet. She approached. Carefully, like someone might approach an unknown animal, unsure if it would flee or bite. "Mom," she said, and the word hung between us like a question. "Sophie," I replied. "Congratulations. It was a beautiful ceremony." She studied my dress, my earrings, my face, looking for the mother she remembered maybe, or trying to reconcile this version with whatever story she'd been telling herself. "Your dress is different," she said finally. "Yes," I agreed. "It is. Jessica said you've been in Oregon, taking art classes, among other things." She waited for more, for explanations or apologies or the emotional breakdown that would let her cast me as the villain or the victim. When none came, she shifted uncomfortably in her designer heels. "I didn't think you'd come," she admitted. "Why wouldn't I come to my daughter's wedding?" "Because—" She stopped, probably realizing that explaining would mean acknowledging the chasm between us, the months of silence, the deliberate exclusion. I don't know. I could have pushed, could have listed every hurt, every slight, every moment of erasure, could have made her wedding day about our broken relationship and my journey to wholeness. But standing there in my emerald dress, feeling the Oregon clay still somehow under my fingernails despite careful scrubbing, I found I didn't need to. "I hope you'll be happy," I said instead. "Marcus seems like a good man." "He is," she said quickly. "His family, yes, I've met Evelyn. She's very accomplished." Sophie flushed slightly. "She's been helpful, with the planning. I'm glad you had the support you needed." Each response seemed to throw her more off balance. This wasn't the script she'd prepared for, the confrontation or capitulation she'd expected. I wasn't playing any of the roles she'd assigned me, not the bitter abandoned mother, or the apologetic prodigal, or the eager to reconcile parent willing to pretend nothing had happened. "You look good," she said finally. "Different, but good. Happy, maybe?" "I am happy," I said, surprising. Us both with the simple truth of it. "Are you?" She opened her mouth, probably to give the automatic "of course" that brides are supposed to give on their wedding day. But something in my face must have stopped her, because she paused, really considering. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "I thought I'd feel more. I thought having everything perfect would make me feel." She trailed off, looking young suddenly despite the sophisticated dress and elaborate updo. "Feel what?" I prompted gently. "Whole, I guess. Like I'd finally be the person everyone expects me to be. Successful lawyer, perfect wife, part of this impressive family. But I just feel like I'm playing a part, like none of it's really mine." I wanted to comfort her, to pull her into my arms and tell her it would be okay. But that wasn't my role anymore. Maybe had never been my role in the way I'd thought. Instead, I said, "Those are important realizations to have, even on your wedding day, especially on your wedding day." She looked at me sharply. "Is that why you left? Because you felt like you were playing a part?" "I didn't leave," I corrected. "I stepped back, like you asked. And yes, in that space, I discovered I'd been playing a part for a very long time. The part of the perfect mother who had no needs of her own, no dreams beyond her daughter's dreams, no identity outside of supporting others. It was exhausting. "I never asked you to be perfect," Sophie protested. "No," I agreed. "But you did ask me to be less, to take up less space, have less involvement, need less from our relationship. And I finally listened." Tears threatened her carefully applied makeup. "That's not what I meant." "Sophie," Marcus's voice called from inside. "The photographer needs us." She wiped quickly at her eyes, composing herself with the skill of someone used to performing emotions rather than feeling them. "I have to go." "Of course," I said. "It's your day." She started to leave, then turned back. Can we talk? After the honeymoon?" I considered this. "You have my number. You've always had my number." She nodded, understanding maybe for the first time that reconnection would require effort from her, that I wouldn't be chasing her anymore. Then she was gone, swallowed back into her wedding, her new life, her chosen family. I stayed on the terrace a while longer, watching the sun set over the city I'd called home for so many years. Somewhere out there was the house where I'd raised Sophie, full of photographs and memories and the ghost of the mother I'd been. Somewhere was Rosewood Manor, hosting someone else's perfect day. Somewhere was Harold, probably telling golf stories and pretending his family wasn't fractured. But I wasn't in any of those places. I was here, present in my own skin, wearing a dress that made me feel like artwork, carrying the knowledge that I could shape clay and sketch mountains and choose my own happiness. The mother Sophie had wanted to shrink was gone, and in her place stood someone larger, brighter, unapologetically herself. The reception was in full swing when I returned inside. I found my assigned seat at a table with distant relatives who seemed unsure how to talk to me. The old Joan would have made it easy for them, asking about their children, their jobs, their lives, deflecting any attention from herself. But I was tired of making things easy for everyone else. Instead, I talked. About Oregon, about learning to throw pottery and rediscovering art, about Patricia's house in the mountains and the way morning fog looked like the earth breathing. I showed them photos on my phone, not of Sophie, not of family milestones, but of my bowls, my sketches, the view from Patricia's deck. Some relatives seemed confused by this version of me. Others, particularly the women, leaned in with something like hunger in their eyes. "I always wanted to try painting," Harold's cousin Marie confessed. "But with kids and work and everything, it's never too late," I said, meaning it. I was 68 when I picked up charcoal again. The speeches began, Evelyn taking the microphone with practiced ease to welcome Sophie to the Chen Williams. Family. She spoke about legacy and achievement, about the bright future ahead. Marcus's father followed with investment advice disguised as marital wisdom. Friends told carefully curated stories that painted the couple as destined, perfect, #blessed. Then Harold stood, and the room quieted. He'd never been one for public speaking, but he commanded attention with his unexpected presence at the microphone. "I've known Sophie all her life," he began, his voice steady. "Watched her take her first steps, taught her to ride a bike, walked her down the aisle today. But I'm not here to talk about Sophie as a daughter. I'm here to talk about choices." I set down my champagne, suddenly alert. "We all make choices," Harold continued. "Who to love, how to love them, what kind of life to build. Sophie and Marcus are making a choice today to build something together. That's beautiful. But I want to remind them that choices have consequences, and the most important choice you can make is to see the people in your life for who they really are, not who you need them to be." His eyes found mine across the room. Sometimes we get so focused on building the life we think we want that we forget to honor the life we already have. We push away people who don't fit our vision, forgetting that love isn't about fitting into neat boxes. It's about making space for each other to grow, even when that growth takes us in unexpected directions. The room was utterly silent now, even the waitstaff frozen in place. So my wish for Sophie and Marcus is this. May you have the courage to see each other truly, to make space for growth and change, and to remember that the people who love you deserve more than just a place at the table. They deserve a place in your story. He raised his glass. To choices and their consequences. The toast was echoed awkwardly around the room, people unsure what they'd just witnessed. Harold returned to his seat amid scattered applause, catching my eye again with a small nod. I raised my glass to him slightly, acknowledging what he'd done. Not defending me exactly, but making visible what had been politely ignored. Sophie's face was a study in controlled emotions, her smile fixed but her eyes darting between Harold and me. Marcus whispered something in her ear, probably reassuring, and she laughed a little too brightly. The party moved on, music starting, people eager to dance away the discomfort of too much truth at a wedding. I stayed through dinner, through the first dance where Sophie and Marcus moved together like people who'd taken lessons, through the father-daughter dance where Harold held Sophie while she cried a little, though whether from joy or something else, I couldn't tell. I even danced myself when the music turned lively, moving in my emerald dress like someone who'd forgotten she was supposed to fade into the background. But as the evening wore on, I felt the pull of elsewhere. This wasn't my celebration, wasn't my family anymore in the way it had been. I was a guest at the wedding of someone I'd loved completely but no longer knew, watching her start a life that had no room for the person I'd become. I found Harold on my way out. "I'm going," I said simply. He studied me, taking in the dress, the earrings, the woman I'd become in Oregon. "Back to the hotel?" "For tonight, then, I don't know." Patricia made an offer about staying permanently. He absorbed this with the equanimity of a man who'd been preparing for various endings. "And?" "I'm considering it." He nodded slowly. "We should talk. About the house, about everything, but not tonight." "No," I agreed. "Not tonight." He squeezed my hand and I saw in his eyes not heartbreak but a kind of recognition. We'd been living separate lives for years, maybe decades. Now we were just being honest about it. I left without saying goodbye to Sophie. She was in the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by her new family, laughing at something Evelyn had said. She looked happy, or at least like someone performing happiness convincingly. Either way, my presence or absence wouldn't change that. Outside, the September air was cool and clear. I stood for a moment, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of the evening settle and then, surprisingly, lift. I'd come, I'd seen, I'd said what needed saying through my presence more than words. Now I could go. The drive to the hotel was quiet. Just me and the road and the knowledge that I'd closed a chapter I'd been reading too long. Back in my room, I hung up the emerald dress carefully, removed the spiral earrings, washed my face clean of makeup and pretense. In the mirror, I saw myself clearly. Not somebody's mother or wife or disappointment, but Joan. Just Joan. Finally, fully, unapologetically Joan. I pulled out my phone and texted Patricia. "Flying back Tuesday. Let's talk about that garage conversion." Her response came quickly, despite the time difference. "Already sketching plans. Your bowls fired beautifully, by the way. Can't wait to show you." I smiled, picturing those imperfect, glorious bowls, made by hands that were learning to create instead of just serve. Tomorrow I'd deal with logistics, the house, the marriage that had become a friendship, the daughter who might or might not reach out. But tonight, I was just a woman in a hotel room, 68 years old and finally, fully alive. In the Ha'ai Zao morning, I'd drive past Rosewood Manor one last time. Not with regret for what might have been, but with gratitude for the clarity that came from letting go. That deposit I'd never get back had purchased something more valuable than a venue. It had been the first payment on my freedom, the cost of discovering that love didn't require diminishment, that being a good mother didn't mean being less of a person. Sophie would have her life with Marcus and the Chen Williams family, her career and carefully curated existence. She'd send Christmas cards probably, and maybe call on birthdays. Perhaps years from now she'd understand why I'd had to leave, why staying small would have killed something essential in me. Or perhaps she wouldn't. That was her journey to make. Mine led west, to a house that smelled like cedar and clay, to mornings at the pottery wheel and afternoons teaching other women to reclaim their artistic selves, to a sister who saw me clearly and loved what she saw, to bowls that didn't match anything but somehow matched everything, glazed in impossible colors that caught the light like hope. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in years, didn't dream about anyone else's life but my own. The next afternoon, Harold and I sat in our kitchen, soon to be just his kitchen, sharing coffee and dividing up 40 years. "You can have the house," I said. "I just want my personal things and enough to start over." He studied the steam rising from his mug. "That's more than fair. Less than you deserve, actually." "I'm not interested in what I deserve. I'm interested in what I need." We worked through the details with surprising ease. Two people who'd shared a life recognizing it was time to live separately. He'd keep the house, I'd take my share of the savings. We'd sell some things, store others, approach it all with the practical efficiency of a couple who'd learned to be partners even when they'd stopped being lovers. "What about Sophie?" he asked eventually. "What about her?" "She'll blame you. For this too. For breaking up the family." I considered this. "The family's been broken for a while, Harold. We've just been too polite to notice." He laughed, surprising us both. "God, you're different. It's like you finally woke up." Something like that. We signed papers, made plans, discussed who would tell Sophie and when. Harold would handle it, he decided. He'd always been better at delivering difficult news without making it emotional. That evening, I went through the house one last time, selecting what to take. My mother's pearl necklace, despite everything. Photo albums from when Sophie was young, when we'd all been different people. The few pieces of art I'd made before life got too busy for creativity. Not much, really, for 40 years of living. In Sophie's old room, I paused at her bookshelf. All her favorites from childhood still there, waiting for grandchildren who might never come. I touched the spine of The Velveteen Rabbit, remembering how she'd demanded I read it every night for months, how she'd cried when the rabbit became real through being loved. "Real isn't how you are made," I quoted softly to the empty room. "It's a thing that happens to you." I'd spent so long trying to be what others needed that I'd forgotten to become real myself. But now, finally, I was happening to myself. Becoming. Worn and threadbare in some places, yes, but also genuine in a way that all the perfect performances could never achieve. I took the book. Sophie wouldn't miss it, and maybe someday I'd read it to other children. Patricia's neighbor had grandkids who visited, or perhaps students in the art program I was thinking of starting. Stories belonged to whoever needed them most. The last thing I packed was the bowl I'd made at Patricia's, the one with impossible colors and my maiden name carved in the bottom. I wrapped it carefully in bubble wrap, this tangible proof that hands could learn new things, that beauty could emerge from imperfection, that it was never too late to start becoming. Patricia picked me up from the airport on Tuesday, her face bright with plans and possibilities. The drive to her house felt like coming home, the mountains rising to greet me, the air tasting of pine and promise. "Your bowls," she said as we walked in. "Come see." She'd arranged them on a shelf in the studio, a rainbow of imperfect pieces that somehow looked perfect together. Each one different, each one unmistakably mine, each one proof that I could create something from nothing but clay and courage. "They're beautiful," I said, meaning it. "They're you," Patricia corrected. "Finally, fully you." That night, we sketched plans for the garage conversion on napkins, dreaming big about studio space and visiting artist programs and workshops for women rediscovering themselves. Patricia had already talked to contractors, already envisioned what could be. "We'll call it Second Story Studios," she said, "for women writing their second stories." I loved it immediately. The promise in it, the acknowledgement that first stories sometimes needed revision, that new chapters were always possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. "Told Sophie about the divorce. She's processing. Give her time." I showed Patricia, who snorted. "Processing? Like you're a computer file that needs updating." But I felt only compassion for my daughter, trying to understand why her carefully controlled world kept shifting. She'd built her life on certain assumptions, that I'd always be there, always be small, always be managing my needs around hers. Now she had to recalibrate, and that was never easy. "She might come around," Patricia said gently. "She might," I agreed. "Or she might not. Either way, I'll be here, making bowls and teaching classes and becoming more myself every day." That night, I dreamed of Rosewood Manor again, but differently. This time it was full of women, all ages, all stages, throwing clay in the gardens, painting under the gazebo, writing in journals by the fountain, a place not for perfect weddings but for imperfect becomings, for women learning to take up space, make noise, create beauty that didn't match anything but their own inner vision. I woke with the dream still vivid and reached for my sketchbook. Maybe someday, when the Portland studio was established, when I'd learned enough to teach others, maybe there was a way to transform that lost deposit into something larger, something that would help other women step out of roles that no longer fit, find their voices, their art, their second stories. But that was a future dream. For now, there was today, coffee on Patricia's deck, clay waiting in the studio, a life finally shaped by my own hands. Somewhere across the country, Sophie was beginning her married life, probably still processing her mother's unexpected evolution. Harold was learning to cook for one, maybe finding his own freedoms in the space I'd left behind. And I was here, 68 years old, divorced, estranged from my only child, 3,000 miles from everything familiar. I should have been devastated. Instead, I felt like someone who'd finally stopped holding her breath after years underwater. The air hurt sometimes, sharp and clear in lungs used to less oxygen. But it was real air, and I was really breathing it, and that made all the difference. I dressed in jeans and one of Patricia's paint-stained shirts, twisted my hair up with a chopstick like she'd taught me, and went to meet the day. In the studio, fresh clay waited, full of possibility. I centered it on the wheel, took a breath, and began to shape whatever wanted to emerge. Behind me, through the window, the mountains stood patient and eternal, reminding me that becoming took time, that erosion and pressure and transformation were natural forces, not failures. I'd been eroded down to bedrock, pressured until old, forms cracked, transformed by the heat of hard choices. Now I was becoming something new, something unplanned, something entirely my own. The clay rose under my hands, and I smiled, thinking of Ruth's words from that first art class. The hands remember, even when we think they've forgotten. My hands remembered more than art. They remembered how to hold without grasping, how to shape without forcing, how to let go when the time came. They remembered that creation was a birthright, not a luxury, that making something beautiful was as essential as breath. Somewhere, a phone might be ringing with Sophie's delayed reactions, society's judgments, or echoes of who I used to be. But here in the studio, there was only the wheel spinning, the clay rising, and the woman I was still becoming, one imperfect, glorious bowl at a time. The rest could wait. This moment of creation, of possibility, of absolute presence. In my own life, this was what I'd been missing all along. Not my daughter's approval, or my husband's understanding or society's validation. Just this, the simple, radical act of being fully, unapologetically myself. The bowl took shape, tall and proud and slightly tilted, like something learning to dance. I smiled, knowing already how I'd glaze it, in colors that shouldn't work together but would, in defiance of conventional wisdom, in celebration of everything unexpected and true. 3 months later, Second Story Studios opened quietly, without fanfare or formal announcements. Just Patricia and me, welcoming 6 women who'd seen our small ad in the community newsletter. Rediscover your creative self. No experience necessary, just willingness to begin. They came tentatively, these women ranging from their 50s to their 80s, each carrying their own story of dreams deferred. Margaret, whose husband had mockingly called her paintings hobby art until she'd packed them all away. Linda, who'd given up theater for teaching, then teaching for caregiving, then caregiving for emptiness. Sarah, newly widowed, holding grief like a stone she didn't know how to set down. We're all beginners here, I told them that first morning, standing in the converted garage that now bloomed with light from skylights Patricia had insisted on. Beginning isn't about age, it's about courage. We started with simple exercises, making marks on paper, playing with clay like children, remembering what it felt like to create without judgment. Margaret cried over her first sketch. Linda's hands shook as she tried to wedge clay. Sarah sat frozen before the blank canvas until Patricia gently suggested she paint her grief, not around it. But slowly, session by session, something shifted. Hands remembered their power. Voices long silenced began to speak through color and form. The studio filled with more than art. It filled with reclamation, with women becoming themselves again, or maybe for the first time. I taught what I'd learned, that perfection was overrated, that beauty lived in the unexpected, that every mistake was just another path to discovery. But mostly, I held space for their unfolding, the way Patricia had held space for mine. One morning, while demonstrating glazing techniques, my phone rang. Sophie's name on the screen made everyone pause. They all knew my story by now. These women who'd become friends through shared vulnerability. I let it go to voicemail, finished the demonstration, then stepped outside to listen. Her voice was different, smaller, uncertain. "Mom, it's me. I know it's been months. I know you're in Oregon. Dad told me about the studio, about everything. Marcus and I are having some issues. His family, it's complicated. I keep thinking about what you said at the wedding, about playing parts. I think I finally understand. Anyway, I'm flying to Portland next week for a conference. Could we maybe have coffee? I understand if you're too busy. I miss you. The real you, not the one I kept trying to make smaller. Call me back. Please." I stood in Patricia's garden, phone in my hand, watching chickadees flit between the bird feeders. Inside, I could hear laughter as someone's bowl collapsed on the wheel. Real, messy, joyful life happening in real time. I texted back, "Coffee sounds good, but I can only do Tuesday morning, teaching in the afternoon. There's a place called Bramble Cafe on Mississippi. 10 a.m.? Her response was immediate. "Yes, thank you. I'll be there." I went back inside to find Sarah had painted her grief, a storm of blues and grays with unexpected breaks of gold breaking through. "It's angry," she said, surprised. I didn't know I was angry. "Anger's just love with nowhere to go," Linda offered, and we all sat with that truth for a moment. The days until Tuesday passed in their new rhythm, Morning coffee with Patricia, planning workshops, and managing the modest budget. Afternoons in the studio, teaching or creating. Evenings, reading applications from women who'd heard about what we were doing, who wanted their own second stories. Harold called twice, updating me on house maintenance and his golf scores. The easy friendship we'd found in divorce, smoother than the marriage had been in years. He mentioned Sophie's troubles carefully, not asking me to fix them, just sharing information. Evelyn's apparently quite demanding, he said. Lots of expectations about their lifestyle, their social commitments. Sophie's exhausted. She chose that life, I reminded him, though not unkindly. She did, he agreed. But I think she's learning that choosing and living with choices are different things. Tuesday arrived gray and drizzling, Portland showing its moody side. I arrived at Bramble Cafe early, claiming a corner table where we could talk without performance. I ordered tea, Earl Grey with honey, and waited. Sophie appeared in the doorway at exactly 10 a.m., punctual as always, but looking unlike herself. The polished professional exterior was there. Designer coat, leather boots, perfectly styled hair. But underneath, exhaustion showed in the shadows. Under her eyes, the tight set of her shoulders. She spotted me and froze for a moment, taking in my appearance. I'd worn my favorite studio clothes, paint-splattered jeans, a soft sweater the color of sage, my silver hair loose around my shoulders, the spiral earrings, of course, Patricia's rubber boots because I'd been in the garden that morning. Not trying to make a statement, just being myself. "Mom," she said as she sat down. "You look different," I supplied. "I know." "Happy," she corrected. "You look happy." The server came for her order. Complicated latte with multiple specifications. So very Sophie. When we were alone, again she wrapped her hands around her cup like she needed the warmth. "Tell me about the studio," she said. So I did. About Patricia's generosity and vision. About the women finding themselves through clay and paint. About discovery and mess and the joy of creating without apology. Her face cycled through emotions as I talked. Surprise, something like envy, maybe regret. "It sounds amazing," she said when I finished. "Like you found your thing." "I found myself," I corrected gently. "My thing was just the pathway." She absorbed that, then suddenly blurted, "I think I made a mistake." I waited, not rushing to comfort or fix. This was her story to tell. "Not Marcus," she clarified quickly. "He's wonderful, but his family, his world. I thought I wanted it. The prestige, the connections, the perfectly orchestrated life. Evelyn has opinions about everything, where we should live, how I should dress, when we should have children, what schools those hypothetical children should attend. She actually gave me a spreadsheet, Mom, for my life timeline." I sipped my tea, remembering the mother who'd once wanted to plan every detail of a wedding. How far we'd both come, in different directions. "And the worst part," Sophie continued, voice cracking, "is that I went along with it. All of it. Because I thought that's what success looked like. Control, perfection, everything in its place, including people." "Including me," I said, not accusingly, just acknowledging. Tears spilled over her carefully applied makeup. "Especially you." God, Mom, I was so cruel. Pushing you out, making you smaller, acting like your love was an embarrassment instead of a gift. "You were trying to become who you thought you needed to be," I said. "We all do that sometimes." "But you stopped," she said. "You refused to stay small. You left." "I grew," I corrected. "There's a difference." We sat with that for a moment, rain pattering against the windows, the cafe humming with morning energy around us. "I don't know how to grow," Sophie admitted. "I don't know how to tell Evelyn to back off. I don't know how to stop performing. I don't even know what I actually want anymore." I reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to place mine palm up between us. An invitation, not a demand. After a moment, she took it. Start with one true thing, I suggested. One thing you know for certain, not what anyone else has told you to want. She thought, then laughed shakily. I hate the law. I've hated it for years. I want to teach. High school history like Dad. But Evelyn says teaching is beneath our social status. Evelyn isn't living your life, I reminded her. You are. How did you do it? She asked. How did you just change everything? One choice at a time, I said. And I had help. Patricia, the women at the studio, Harold in his way. But mostly, I just got tired of apologizing for existing. Sophie squeezed my hand. I'm sorry. For all of it. For the wedding. For pushing you away. For being too proud to call for months. I know, I said simply. But I'm not the one who needs the apology most. She frowned. Who does? You do. You need to forgive yourself for being human, for making mistakes, for not having everything figured out at 28. Fresh tears. Came then, the kind that wash things clean. I handed her napkins, and we sat quietly while she composed herself. The old me would have rushed to make it better, to offer solutions and comfort and a soft place to land. But Sophie didn't need soft right now. She needed truth and space to find her own way through. Would you... She started, then stopped. Could I maybe visit the studio? See what you're building? You're welcome to visit, I said carefully. But not to perform or please me or because you think you should. Only if you genuinely want to see it. I do, she said quickly, then laughed. That was my first instinct, to say what I thought you wanted to hear. This is going to take practice. Most important things do. We talked for another hour about Marcus, supportive but caught between wife and mother, about the possibility of her leaving law, about the strange freedom that comes from disappointing people who were disappointed anyway. When we parted, she hugged me. Not the careful, appropriate embrace of recent years, but something real and fierce and full of possibility. I love you, she said. The real you. All of her. I love you too, I replied. All of you, even. The parts still figuring themselves out. I walked back to my car through the rain, boots splashing in puddles, feeling lighter and heavier simultaneously. Lighter because truth had been spoken. Heavier because I knew Sophie's journey was just beginning, and it would be hard, and I couldn't walk it for her. At the studio, I found my afternoon class in full swing, Patricia leading them through a raku firing. The women watched, mesmerized, as she pulled glowing pieces from the kiln, their faces lit by more than fire. I joined them, slipping easily, into the rhythm of shared creation. How was coffee? Patricia asked quietly. Complicated, I said, but real. She nodded, understanding. Real was better than easy, we'd learned. Real lasted. That evening, I sat at my wheel, not planning anything, just letting my hands move with the clay. What emerged surprised me. A set of nesting bowls, each one fitting inside the other, but also complete on its own. Like relationships, I thought. Like the way love could hold space without consuming. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Thank you for today, for everything. I'm going to talk to Marcus tonight about making some changes. Scary but necessary. Also, I looked up your studio online. The work is beautiful. You're beautiful. I'm proud to be your daughter. I read it twice, then set the phone aside and returned to my clay. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, for Sophie in her difficult conversations, for me in continuing to build this new life, for all the women finding their way back to themselves. But tonight, there was just this. My hands in clay, rain on the roof, the quiet satisfaction of creating something from nothing. The nesting bowls would need careful glazing, I decided. Each one a different shade, but from the same color family. Blues, maybe. From deep ocean to pale sky. Something about holding and releasing, about connection and independence, about the way love could evolve when you let it. I worked until my back ached and my hands cramped, until Patricia came to remind me about dinner. We cooked together, simple food in her warm kitchen, talking about the day and planning tomorrow. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving everything clean and shining. Later, reading in bed, I thought about second stories. How they weren't really about starting over, but about continuing with new knowledge. Sophie would find her way, or she wouldn't. She'd leave law, or she wouldn't. She'd stand up to Evelyn or learn to navigate around her. But whatever she chose, it would be hers to choose. And I would be here, making bowls and teaching workshops and learning every day what it meant to be fully myself. Not in opposition to anyone else, not in reaction to old wounds, but simply because this was who I'd always been underneath the roles and responsibilities and careful performances. My phone lit up with one last message before sleep. Harold, sending a photo of a lopsided cake he'd made from scratch. "Cooking class is going well," the caption read. "Who knew I could bake?" I smiled, thinking of all the things we didn't know we could do until life forced us to try. All the selves waiting inside us, patient as seeds, ready to grow when given light and room and time. Tomorrow, I'd glaze the nesting bowls. Tomorrow, I'd teach another class. Tomorrow, Sophie would have hard conversations and make brave choices, or maybe just think about them a little longer. Tomorrow, Patricia and I would dream up new workshops, new ways to help women reclaim their creative selves. But tonight, I was complete in my incompleteness, finished in my becoming, a work of art still being shaped by hands that finally, fully belonged to me. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.